bless you all. Tune into VTTN radio. It's indeed a great blessing to once again be here to share with you teacher ShemaFaith. Grateful for the privilege that I have received through the ministers of VTTN to share this broadcast with you, and I trust that as we go on together, that our souls will be enriched in the process. On today's feature, I want to speak to you on the progressional process of faith. We will see this concept coming out in the latter part of this study series that we are undertaking. But we would want to look a little bit at its context, because the context is making reference to Israel. And this starts in chapter 9. And we want to come into chapter 10 to see what Paul is saying in relation to Israel on the principle of faith. If we had paid keen attention to Israel's history, we would realize that throughout the Old Testament, Israel has been known to be the chosen nation of God, the very special people of God. Israel was a nation that was very dear to God, and we would know that the salvation we celebrate today and the deliverance that we so enjoy today from God came out of a descendant of Israel, from the line of Judah, in fact, Jesus Christ himself, according to his human lineage. But if we pay attention and go into Exodus chapter 19 and verse 5, we see that Israel's status as God's special people was conditional on the premise of them being obedient to his voice and being faithful in keeping the covenant. Because Israel had not obeyed the voice of God, and they had not faithfully kept the covenant, their status as the very special people of God were not maintained. Looking into chapter 9, Paul speaks from his heart, and he affirms that the Spirit of the Lord knows his heart towards Israel. Paul's heart to Israel was of such that he highlighted that if it was that he himself were cursed and cut off from Christ just so that they could save, he was willing to do that. Now look at the extent to which Paul really had this love for Israel. In chapter 9 and verse 3 said, "For I could wish that I myself were cursed and cut off from Christ for the sake of my people, those of my own race." That's how much Paul loved his nation, Israel. That's how deeply broken and anguished Paul was in spirit at the state of his own people, Israel. These people were adopted as children of God. They had seen the glory of God. They have engaged in covenant with God. They were recipients of the law of God. They experienced what it means to worship in the temple. And more than anything else, they were the ones who were given the promises of God. And they have a rich historical line, a rich heritage. Their patriarchs, their fathers, tracing all the way down to the line of the Messiah, were belonging to Jesus Christ, were belonging to God. What a privilege Israel had, but yet did not hold on to and guard this privilege as best as they could. And we will see in the text what happened to Israel as we progress in this series. Paul asks a question in verse 6 of chapter 9. He says, it is not as though God's word had failed. Or one translator says, is it that God had failed in fulfilling his promise to Israel? No, God had not failed. Israel is a nation that had failed. Now, we don't have the time to really run through this in all its background details, but I would not want to close this feature today and not bring about some things for us to consider where Israel is concerned. We realize that Israel were meant to be children of the promise. They were children of the promise. But something Paul made clear as we continue reading down through the lines of verse 6, and he says, it is not the children by physical descent who are God's children, but it is the children of the promise who are regarded as Abraham's offspring. For this was how the promise was stated. At the appointed time I will return, and Sarah will have a son. So then, if you're looking at us today, we have become children of the promise. How do we become children of the promise? In St. John chapter 1 and verse 12, it says, for as many as believe, to them he has given the privilege, he has given the authority to be called children of God. So if we believe God, if we believe the promises of God, then we become children of God. And in becoming children of God, we become children of the promise. In our last broadcast, we spoke of the fact that faith is a gift from God. So there has to be a persuasion from God. So there must be an initiation, and then we must respond. So faith involves initiation from God and response from human. Now God has made his initiation by giving his promise. We, on the other hand, must yield ourselves to God in order for the promise that God has made to us to be fulfilled. And what the promise of God entails is what God prefers for us. It is how God prefers that we relate to him. It is my belief that the promise embodies the favor of God. So what God promises is God's favor. And God is not going to give his favor on the basis of merit. So one doesn't receive God's favor because of how good he is, and one will not be rejected in receiving God's favor because of how bad he is. So it is not how bad or how good you is that determine that you receive the favor of God. It is based on the promise of God and responding, yielding ourselves to God by faith, giving ourselves to God by faith. Now there is something that we need to understand also. Promise is bound by covenant. promise is binding on the covenant that one engages with God. Israel did not receive the promise. They did not maintain their status as a special treasure of God for failure to yield themselves to the promises of God, keeping true to the covenant of God, which is what binds the promise. We will continue in this feature, on this study rather, the next time we meet again. This is Apostle Didaskalos, you today on ShemaFaith. May the Lord bless you, and may He continue to enrich your soul, and may He continue to give us His peace. And as He has strategically placed us in the position that He has now placed us in, may we know that He has placed us there, that by faith we will experience and do the impossible. There are great things ahead of all of those who will believe in God and will not faint in their faith. God bless you until we meet again.